and state governments don't have to perform well or perform at all to generate the funds on which they depend. It comes to them like manna from heaven, even though we know that the source is the rent from the oil fields of the Niger Delta. Being wealthy, very, very wealthy in many cases in our country, has little or nothing to do with value-added production, but has everything to do with where one is located in the sharing of the rents from the oil wealth bonanza through contracts, handouts, and simple, straightforward loans. Particularly at the center of things, at the level of the federal government, of the federation, and the ruling party, the standards of performance in virtually all areas of governance are so low that almost any other party or phalanx of politicians can credibly claim that they can do better than the current incumbent, even though there is little to choose between the ruling class parties in terms of their ideologies and their value orientation. Almost everywhere that we find corruption in our country, mediocrity is never too far behind. At this point, and drawing upon my professional academic interest in linguistic, literary, and cultural studies, I would like to offer some thoughts on the separate and yet connected relations between the cognate terms corrupt, corruptive, and corrupted. My intention in doing this is both to further clarify and broaden the ramifications of this link that I am urging between corruption and mediocrity in our country. Thus, when we say that a person, an act, or a process is corrupt, we are alluding adjectively to a quality, a disposition, or an effect. The term corruptive, on the other hand, lends a dimension that old school or traditionalist teachers of language like to describe as more active, more dynamic. In other words, the term corruptive implies an active transformation that turns that which is not initially corrupt to that which becomes tainted with corruption. The term corrupted lends an even more dynamic, more perfected or completed dimension to the term corruptive, which is why it is at this level that the term corruption that we use so often to describe our politicians and their habitual practices takes on the quality of a spectre, a malaise, a generalized social pathology that reeks of rot, decay, and putrefaction. In this respect, I would argue that in a Nigerian context, corruption is to politicians and political parties as corrupted is to virtually all our institutions, both religious and secular, both private and public, both local and nationwide. Here is another way of coming to terms with a very urgent, perhaps even desperate link between corruption and mediocrity that I am arguing here. We tend to associate corruption primarily with our electoral process and our politicians and political parties. But who among us is unaware of the cheap, superstitious, and facile religiosity that underlies the grip of Naira and the amassing of great wealth in our mega churches and among our most prominent jet-setting religious leaders? Who is unaware of the scale of examination malpractices in our primary and secondary educational institutions and the abysmal quality of instruction and preparation that our undergraduates receive in our universities, polytechnic, our educational institutions? Since I have written extensively on this issue, I will give only a few particularly secondary and tertiary institutions. Thus, the failure rates in our secondary school leaving examination, only 1.8% of those who start for the exams passed. Leaving capacities are poorly ranked in the world, for not a single one of them is among the 2,000. In the most recently released rankings, only 8 out of our universities were listed among the first 100 universities, 20. And within the country itself, In the business sector of the economy, potential employers of our university graduates, the instruction our university students receive are so appallingly poor that a lot of depressing regularity that has a grim foreboding for the future of our country. From this, I wish to state with as much emphasis as I can muster that it is our rulers, our politicians and political parties that we must hold accountable if we wish to arrest the rot and decay that acts like a dictatorship in our present political order. One aspect of a comprehensive transnational view of corruption that we will do well to keep in mind in this respect is the fact that as much as it is a phenomenon that most countries of the world have to contend with, corruption is not always or even necessarily linked with mediocrity as we find it with our rulers. As a matter of fact, as big as corruption is in Nigeria, it is nothing in size compared with the corruption that has been documented and much discussed with regard to some of the biggest transnational business conglomerates of Western and East Asian countries. Without in the least bit offering, now this much is known about the scale of remuneration of the members of our National Assembly. Both in relative and absolute terms, they are the highest paid legislators in the world. For instance, we do know that each of the members of our House of Representatives and the Senate collects far more in salaries, allowances, and bonuses than the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. In the face of the universal outcry in the country against the warping scale of our legislators' remuneration package, they have been extremely secretive about the precise figures. Indeed, the length to which they are apparently willing to go to keep these exact figures hidden from public awareness and scrutiny seems to have no bounds. Thus, when a former member of the House, Honorable Dino Melaye, began to go public with these figures, he was swiftly and severely dealt with by the leadership of the House. Indeed, the manner in which he was silenced was so effective that no other member of the National Assembly has since then ever dared to follow the President comprehended. As outrageous at what was done to silence Mr. Melaye and then to use him as a negative example for potential whistleblowers, it pales into relative insignificance in comparison with how the National Assembly responded when a civil society organization, the Legal Assistance and Aid Project, LEPAD, invoked the Freedom of Information Act of 2011 to compel our legislators to reveal to the Nigerian people exactly how much they are paid. They refused absolutely. Consequent on this refusal, LEPAD dragged the National Assembly to the courts. In a suit argued by the frontline activist lawyer, Femi Falana, SAN, a High Court ordered the National Assembly to act in accordance with the law that it had itself passed by promptly releasing the full details of the salaries and emoluments to members of the Assembly. They still refused and then took the matter to federal court. The case is still pending in the court. Since 2011, when the Act was enacted, he has invoked the Act in relation to a range of issues of public good that pertain to a whole group of governmental functionaries, parastatals, private commercial interests, including but not limited to the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation, the Universal Basic Education UBE Commission, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency NDLEA, and the GSM Internet providers. I do not think that Falana harbors any illusion at all that by itself, the Freedom of Information Act will radically and positively transform the present endlessly corrupt and mediocre Nigerian political order. But he is taking this prevailing and deeply unjust, wasteful, and corrupted order to the very limits of its claim to being a democracy founded on the rule of law, and not a failing state perpetually on the brink of becoming a failed state. Let Falana's example be a wake-up call to our media houses and our journalists that they must rediscover the reasons why they fought long and hard for this act to be passed. I end with the words of a song by Oshupa that I find very reflective on the desperate optimism that has driven much of what I've been saying in this lecture. Nigeria go better, Nigeria go good, oh. Nigeria go better, Nigeria go good, oh. I thank you.
IOB, the present chair of the Board of Studies of the Wole Soyinka Centre.
I know it's quite tight, so you try your best to squeeze in. Yes, so sorry, I'm missing that. Come up with something. We always come up with something fun. I mean, the religious, the Christians always say to come to Jesus, but we know that's not going to work with our uncle Wole Soyinka. So, what should we be counting? Yes, FOI. So, at the count of, we're going to come to FOI. And at the point of I, Professor Jeyifo, you should advocate. So, please with me. FOI. Thank you very much.
Dictatorship, Mediocrity, and corruption, freedom of information. Good morning, class. Good morning, sir. We are happy to see you, sir. God bless you, sir. Amen, sir. You may have your seat. Today, our lesson is titled The Freedom of Information Act and the Dictatorship of Mediocrity and Corruption. Repeat after me. Freedom of Information Act and the Dictatorship of Mediocrity and Corruption. Good. There's an utmost need for us to draw one another's attention to the increase in awareness, usefulness, and strength of the Freedom of Information Act, using it as a tool to tackle impunity, mediocrity, and corruption in the society. Freedom of Information Act, aka my right to know. This means the right to access information held by public bodies. As a colonial territory and later an independent state, Nigeria inherited from their colonial masters a culture in which secrecy was the default mode of dealing with information. Although the right to the freedom of information is enshrined under Section 39 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as well as Section 9 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, spelled out under Cap A07 Laws of the Federation, 2004. Like they say, every nation deserves the kind of leadership it gets because I mean I am trying to every nation. Okay. If you disagree with me, now tell me, what is Nigeria's greatest problem? Leadership.
Yes. Lack of human rights.
Well,
Corruption is part of them. Mediocrity.
Mediocrity. Mediocrity is something of ordinary form, not good nor bad, not satisfactory, inferior or poor. Very poor.
No wonder in Nigeria
Nigeria, we are proud to serve as a brave motherland.
Nigeria, a nation blessed with rich human and natural resources.
Now so.
Has mediocrity as its greatest problem, because it steals not just the time of the citizen, but the country as a whole, leading to stagnation. Mediocrity is actually our problem, much more than corruption. It takes away the most important resource, time.
It takes away the most important resource, time.
While corruption focuses on physical resources, mediocrity brings about lack of excellence. Mediocrity itself is the reason for corruption. So, it is better to steal the money than the time.
Sure, always.
Not higher than yourself, but talent instantly recognizes genius. It is not easy to doing it. But mediocrity, only mediocrity can be trusted to be always at its best. My people, my people, and I'm supposed to see corruption get different levels.
Yes.
For simple language, man, corruption is say, make a good like get to serve. Papa went to adult children bribe him pikin.
Nah, corruption.
Pastor waiting for free, go buy private jets.
Nah, corruption. Government official waiting subsidy money. Nah, corruption. Corruption can be found in different forms of the economy. It can be found in dictatorial and non-dictatorial politics.
Attention!
Democracy forever! Feudal, capitalist and socialist regimes, religious cultures are also bedeviled by corruption. A state where there is widespread corruption functions very poorly, and a poorly functioning state can only undermine economic growth. In Nigeria today, corruption has become systematic, and with natural resources, mediocrity, and corruption, we are failing to benefit the ordinary citizens.
Within the African continent, Nigeria is now the 9th country to have passed the FOIA. Other countries being Angola, Ethiopia, Guinea, Liberia, Niger, and South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Meanwhile, while many Nigerians may be celebrating the enactment of the act, it is now clear that the FOIA contains some inherent deficiencies in it.
The FOIA contains more exemption sections than possible than sections that grant access to information. A situation which might be exploited by some public officers for mischievous purposes. But the point is, we have our FOIA, so let us use it well.
Accountability does matter. So also, transparency is necessary for accountability.
Eventually, the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, was signed into law on the 28th of May 2011 by President Goodluck E. Jonathan. It is the first law that empowers Nigerians with the right to access records of public institutions as well as private sectors where they perform responsibilities of public nature. The Act, which is a codification of the right to know and also a fundamental human right, grants every Nigerian citizen the legally enforceable right to access public health records.
Any refusal to disclose information held by a public body by a requester is subject to appeal to the High Court. It is also important to note that nobody is above the provisions of the FOIA.
The whole culture of record keeping and maintenance, retrieval capacity challenge in many public institutions, bureaucracy in the public sector, as well as widespread corruption and appalling ignorance among the workforce of the public sector. These constitute challenges to the achievement of the goals of the FOIA.
Finally, it is the responsibility of all Nigerians to carry out the oversight for functions of ensuring compliance to the provision of the Act and not that of the government alone.
And the entire citizenry must rise up and exercise their right to know, as the impact of the Act do not rest on the civil society alone.
As such, the mass media and the general public must take full advantage of the Act.
Say no to mediocrity. Say no to corruption. It takes you and I to make that change.
Create for a free, fair, neutral, and just state.
Give honesty a room.
Say yes to
intellectual,
cultural,
socio-economic,
and political developments.